Welcome to medieval dinner time. Your plate is a stale piece of bread that doubles as your table setting. That mysterious brown liquid, that's your soup, and trust me, you don't want to know what's swimming in it. The spices? Sorry, those are for the rich folks. Hello, tonight we start with a question that's not easy to answer. What would happen if you decided to betray Julius Caesar? Not in a Shakespeare play, not in a glitzy historical drama, but in a real world, gritty, reeking of blood, with glances sharp as daggers behind your back. You're not Brutus, not Cassius, nor a starring figure in the history books. You're just a small cog in the grandest conspiracy machine of the Roman Republic. And the bad news? Even small cogs can get crushed. Before you lean back in your chair, make sure you're truly ready. Because what you're about to hear isn't a history lecture. This is a stab through time, a vivid report, foul, bloody, and very, very real. If you're in a quiet place, turn off the lights, maybe light a candle, not some fancy lavender one, but something that smells like ancient Rome, pungent, acrid, with a vague whiff of sweat. And if you hear the sound of a blade being drawn from its sheath, maybe you should run. But don't worry, it's not time yet, because you still don't know who you are. All you know is this: you're living in 44 BC. Caesar has just returned from his glorious victories in Gaul, hailed as the people's hero, Rome's father, and dictator for life. Those who were once allies now whisper, quiet words in Senate meetings, feasts without wine but full of intent. A single glance can mark someone as friend or foe, and you, a minor official, a nameless scribe, a shadow in the political wings, have stumbled too close to the eye of the storm. Maybe you don't hate Caesar. Maybe you once carried a shield under his command at Alesia. Maybe he once patted your shoulder and said, "You wrote that report well." But the reason doesn't matter. What matters is this: you're being pulled into a conspiracy. No way out. No time to hide. Only a choice: stand with Caesar or stand behind him with a dagger in your hand. And what no one tells you is this: betrayal doesn't end when the blood spills. That's where it begins. Blood will stain your toga. Caesar's eyes will haunt your sleep. And Rome, this city that loves freedom and demands loyalty, won't forgive. Whether you survive, flee, change your name, shave your head, pose as a priest or a vegetable seller, the past will hunt you like a bloodthirsty hound. You think you'll be remembered as a champion of justice? Sorry, history isn't that fair. It chooses who gets to be told and who gets trampled under statues' feet. And you, if you're lucky, will be a faint name, scribbled between two lines by a sleepy historian. If you're unlucky, no one will remember you ever lived. But don't despair yet, because from now on, you have 25 more chapters to prove otherwise. This is Rome. There's no justice, only power, and power, as you're about to learn, always comes with an unexpected price. Ready? Because right after those footsteps, Caesar will walk in, and you've already picked up the dagger. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest stories. You open your eyes when it's still dark, not because you want to wake up early, but because a rat just scurried across your face. You live in Subura, Rome's most infamous slum, where days are dusty and nights reek. Your home is a rented room in an insula, a 3-story tenement with cracked walls, creaky wooden stairs, and upstairs neighbors who gift the lower floors by dumping human waste out their windows. Every morning, you crawl out of a bed, hard as the Appian Way, wrapped in an old wool blanket, smelling of mold and dried cat urine, and tell yourself, at least I'm not dead today. You're a second-class citizen, not a slave, but no aristocrat either. You were once a soldier, surviving bloody battles in Gaul, but now you're a scribe recording Senate speeches. Your job is to sit behind old men in white togas, writing down every word they yell, ramble, or bicker about over land disputes. You have no vote, but miswrite a single word, and you could be scolded, fired, or in bad cases, whipped with a leather strap. Today you wash your face with cold water from a wooden bucket, with greasy scum floating on top. Wipe yourself with an old cloth that used to be a table runner, and pull from under the bed the thinnest tunica in fashion history. Your shoes are just 2 pieces of leather tied with string, both soles worn through, making every step feel like you're treading on Pluto's face. Breakfast is a chunk of bread, hard as a brick, and a piece of cheese turning green. You chew in silence as outside someone shouts, "Salted fish, 3 for a coin, flies included free," and a neighbor woman yells at her son for not getting up to help his father carry water. You squeeze through a muddy alley and join the crowd heading to the Forum Romanum. On the way you hear gossip. Yesterday, Caesar refused the laurel crown offered by the people. "He's humble," says a bearded man. "No, he's just pretending to refuse so they'll want to crown him more," a woman retorts. That's Rome. Every rumor is a wildfire, and you're living in a city made of straw. You reach the Curia on time, or at least not too late. You settle into your spot, set out your stylus and wax tablet, and take a deep breath. The Senate chamber smells thick, sweat, olive oil, and ambition. Brutus sits in a far corner, eyes down. Cassius leans against a column, hands clenched, as if he's strangling someone in his mind. Trebonius smiles too much for an innocent man. And you're a shadow. No one remembers your name. No one asks what you think, but you see everything. You hear everything. Caesar hasn't arrived, but you already feel the weight of his name heavy in the air like a thundercloud. Gaius Julius Caesar, the man who broke the Republic's traditions, once consul, governor, general, now declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. A man worshipped by the people, but driving the elite mad. And you, through a series of vague decisions, or because you were too curious, too foolish, or just didn't want to be left out of the game, agreed to hear Cassius out a few days ago. Just to listen, no commitments, no promises, but you showed up. And that was the first step. Now as Brutus's gaze slides over you like your air, you realize you're no longer an outsider. You're in the vortex. Somehow they've started calling you one of us. You don't remember nodding. You don't remember who slipped the short dagger into your hand and said, "Keep it, for when it's needed." But you're still holding it, under your tunica, wrapped in cloth. And every night, you check its blade as if preparing for a carving contest. You start paying closer attention to Caesar's words in the Senate sessions. There's something in how he stands in the room's center, light catching his salt and pepper hair, his hand raised to emphasize each word, both captivating and terrifying. He knows how to make all of Rome listen, but he also makes you feel small, invisible, meaningless. And that feeling, it makes you angry. You don't know if you're angry at Caesar or at yourself for being so easily swayed, so you start listening to Cassius's whispers more. He wants to be king. If we don't stop him, Rome will become Egypt. And you, what do you want history to remember you as? You have no answer, but you know that question won't go away. It'll stay, repeating, every day, every night, every time you see Caesar's shadow in the crowd. You're not Brutus, not Cassius, not named in history books, but you're there. And one day, when blood stains the Curia's floor, when Caesar falls, and the crowd screams, you'll have to ask yourself, who am I in all this? But today, you're still nameless, a shadow, a second-rate clerk, someone who once laughed at politics, and politics is laughing back. You start your day like any ordinary Roman citizen. Surviving last night is already a victory. The din of Subura wakes you before the sun rises over the Palatine Hill. Above you, a couple upstairs argues, mixed with the sound of something heavy falling down the rickety wooden stairs. Maybe a broken pot, maybe a person. Your room smells of neighbors' cooking smoke, yesterday's dried sweat, and something decomposing under the cracked tiles. You pull back the curtain, really just a tied-up sackcloth, and look down at the street. Rome is awake. Slaves haul water barrels, splashing mud and refuse. A bread seller scolds a child for stealing. Drunk soldiers from last night still haven't found their way home. And amid it all, there's you, a tiny speck in the vast, hungry, messy belly of the city. You sit up on your plank bed, joints creaking like a tightened bowstring, and rummage for something resembling clothes. Your tunica has had 3 owners before you. Its inner lining torn, since Nero's unborn days. Every time you raise your arm, it exposes parts no one wants to see. You tie a hemp rope as a belt, slip on leather shoes with no real soles, and take a deep breath, as if stepping into an arena. Breakfast, if you call a piece of bread, hard as Jupiter's temple bricks, a meal, sure. You dip it in a bowl of olive water mixed with vinegar, swallowing it like you're eating a stone statue. Your tooth's been aching since last week, but no one has money for a doctor, nor trusts them, since most double as soothsayers. You leave home, sticking to the main street. You're on Senate duty today, and you don't want to be late. Not out of fear of losing your job, but because being late means no shady seats left. You cross the Forum Roman, amid hawkers' shouts and pigeon droppings falling like rain. A man selling Lucky Charms yells, "Buy now," before Caesar gives you the evil eye. You almost buy one. On the way, you see a crowd near the Temple of Castor. Someone's performing dressed as Caesar, wearing a parsley laurel crown, shouting, "I don't want to be king. I just want more taxes." Just silence, as if everyone already knew the meeting's purpose without saying it. Wine was poured, bread was cut, but no one ate. Cassius spoke first, no preamble. "Rome is dying," he said. "Not from disease, but from power. One man, one name, one crown not yet worn, but already casting a shadow over this city." You didn't respond. Brutus closed his eyes, as if each of Cassius's words cut into his soul. Cassius went on, "I don't hate Caesar. I respect him, but Caesar isn't Caesar anymore. He's the shadow of a king, and Rome doesn't accept kings." Another man chimed in. "The people love him, but they don't understand. They cheer when he breaks laws. They shout when he tramples the Senate, and when they realize, it'll be too late." You found your head nodding. No one told you to nod, but you nodded, and once you did, you were no longer an outsider. Cassius looked at you. You followed him, lived and fought for him. Your word carries weight. If you're here, you've agreed. You don't remember what you said. Maybe I understand. Maybe for Rome. Maybe nothing at all. But everyone's eyes shifted, from Cassius to you, as if you'd just become a link in the most intricate killing chain in history. Then they started planning. Brutus set the date, the Ides of March, Curia Pompeii, a Senate session with Caesar present. Guards would be distracted. Antony would be delayed, weapons hidden in cloaks. "We don't kill Caesar with an army," Brutus said, voice soft as silk, but sharp as a blade. "We kill him with the hands of those who once called him friend." Someone asked, "Should we kill Antony too?" Cassius nodded. "He's dangerous." But Brutus shook his head. "No, we're not hired assassins. If we kill Antony, we become executioners. We kill only Caesar." For the ideal, a heavy silence followed. Ideal, a big word for a small act, stabbing a man who once called you comrade. You left the dinner when the night was pitch black. The walk home felt twice as long. You passed narrow streets, where lamp shadows flickered like silent witnesses to your dreadful thoughts. A dog followed you for a few meters, then left, as if it didn't want to be involved. You reached home, sat by the door, dagger still untouched, but mind heavy. You didn't speak to anyone for 3 days after, but your head never stopped talking to itself. Every time you heard Caesar's name, your heart raced. Every time you saw Antony, you thought he saw through you. Stall, and every night, you dreamed of the Curia collapsing, blood pooling like September rain, and one sentence echoing, "You've already chosen." And you have. In the dark, without light, without oaths, just by staying silent, you've chosen. And Rome doesn't spare those who pick the wrong side. People laugh, then hush when a real guard passes. Rome can be funny, but only when the powerful aren't nearby. You reach the Curia and slip into your usual spot between two large columns, where dust gathers enough to carve your name if you wanted. You pull out your wax tablet, scribbling a few lines to warm your hand. Senators file in. You hear familiar names: Cicero, Brutus, Cassius. Caesar hasn't arrived, but the air's already thick. A debate about new trade routes off Sicily unfolds, but it's just surface noise. Veiled hints, metaphors, and power jabs are tossed with feigned nonchalance. You write it all down, but your mind's elsewhere. You notice Brutus is quieter than usual, while Cassius smiles too much. A man doesn't smile like that, unless he's about to do something insane. At noon, you get a break. You and other scribes gather under a tree near the Temple of Saturn. You're not close with them, but today a new guy, skinny, with an Etruscan accent, asks what you think of Caesar. You don't answer. That question is never harmless. You focus on lunch, old olives, dried fish, and a slightly moldy bread crust. You chew like nothing's wrong, but your mind's restless. You recall Cassius's words from a few nights ago: "We're not killing a man, we're saving Rome." you've never killed outside battle, and those were enemies in different colored armor. But killing Caesar, a man in a toga like yours, passing you daily? You don't know, but you also know hesitation is a crime too. Afternoon comes, and you return to work. The session drones on about land reforms, but you only hear your heartbeat. Caesar arrives late. He enters with one hand raised, eyes scanning the room like he's checking every soul. You bow your head, though no one told you to. Something about his presence makes you small and angry. Soon after, the session ends. You gather your tablets, stand and leave with the crowd. Darkness falls on Rome, but the city doesn't quiet. Taverns light up. Prostitutes laugh from balconies. A soothsayer mutters on a corner. You pass the temple of Julius Mundi, where rebels often meet, but don't stop. Tonight you'll go home. Think, dream of Caesar's gaze, and wonder tomorrow, if blood spills, what will you do? You're just an ordinary Roman. But in Rome, ordinary is never safe. And sometimes it's the ordinary ones who do extraordinary things. Caesar was once your hero, not in a distant statue of Jupiter way, but in the way of a man who followed him through Gaul's muddy roads, back soaked with rain, spear in hand, ears ringing with his voice commanding amid war horns. You were a grunt in the 13th Legion, a unit so renowned that other camps' recruits bowed as you passed. Caesar wasn't like any commander you'd met. He didn't shout nonsense like those shiny helmeted nobles who never slashed anything but kitchen pigs. He led from the front, looked soldiers in the eye, and when he said, "We'll win," you believed. Not because he promised, but because he left you no choice but to believe. That was the kind of leader you'd die for, and you nearly did, at Gergovia, where arrows fell like rain and blood mixed with mud into an unforgettable sludge. After that battle, he visited the wounded camp, passing you lying on a stretcher, your wounds smelling like cheese left out for 3 days. He didn't say much, just looked, nodded, and ordered, "Give him more wine and a cleaner bed." Not a big deal, but you remember it to this day. When he crossed the Rubicon, you weren't there. You'd been discharged, back in Rome with a scar longer than your yearly earnings. But you heard the news, and you smiled. He'd done what no one dared, marched an army into Italy, defying the Republic with a phrase now legendary, alia acta, estimated, the die is cast. You didn't understand the law, but you understood, Caesar doesn't gamble to lose. Then he won. Pompey fled, the Senate scattered. Caesar returned like a living god. The people cheered. You stood in the crowd outside the temple of Venus Genitrix, where he built a statue to his ancestress, feeling like you'd contributed to it. You'd sworn loyalty to him. No papers, no ceremonies, just a nod when someone asked, "Whose side are you on?" You were on Caesar's side, and he didn't let you down. At least, not at first. Then he started doing things you didn't understand. He forgave Brutus. He let Cassius back into politics. He sat through Cicero's speeches criticizing power, only to smile like every word was a breeze. He held the Lupercalia festival, where Antony offered him a crown, and he refused 3 times. People said, "He's humble." You started thinking, or is he playing a game I don't get? Then rumors spread. Caesar wants to be king. Caesar will end the Republic. Caesar wants to be worshipped as a god. At first you laughed. Caesar, a king. He hated that pomp, hated rituals, hated pretense. But then you looked closer. He wore a deeper red toga. He walked slower, spoke like every word would be carved in stone. He wasn't the general leading troops anymore. He was the politician leading crowds, and the crowds were drunk on him. You saw people kneel as he passed. Some threw flowers, some kissed his cloak. A baker shouted, "Ave Caesar," and he nodded like he deserved it. That's when a part of you cracked. You weren't sure who you followed anymore. A general or a king? A man or a myth building his own throne in Rome's heart? Then he started changing laws, stripped some senators' veto power, appointed his own men to the Senate, called himself father of the nation, and most chilling, he rebuilt the Curia Pompeii in a Greek style, the architecture of Eastern kings. What's Rome if it's not Rome anymore? And who are you, if the man you swore to follow has become what you fought against? But what unsettles you most isn't Caesar, it's you. You remember his look in the wounded camp, how he raised a cup to old soldiers and said, "To those who never turn their backs." You never thought you'd betray him. but you also never thought Rome would change like this. You don't hate Caesar. You even pity him. If he'd stopped, just a bit, taken one step back, things might have been different. But he didn't stop, and now you must decide. Keep your old oath, or keep the Rome you once believed in. You hold the dagger, not out of hatred, but for memory, for a dream, for an oath no one else may remember, but you do. And sometimes, that makes you more dangerous than any enemy. You don't know exactly when the conspiracy began, only that it didn't start with daggers, but with whispers, words slow as rain on stone, soft, steady, but given time, they carve canyons. It started with a jest at the market. He'll be king, mark my words. Then a too long pat on the shoulder from Cassius, his eyes narrowing like he'd already mapped the whole game, and was just waiting for you to realize you're a pawn. Then one day, after a Senate session, as you packed your wax tablets to leave, Cassius leaned in, voice softer than falling leaves. Tonight, my house, a small dinner, some interesting people. You should come. You nodded without knowing what you'd agreed to. On the way home, you told yourself it might just be wine, a dull political gathering, but your heart beat faster than usual, and as the sun set, you found yourself washing your face a third time. Though the water still came from a moldy-smelling bucket, you put on your cleanest tunica, retied your shoes, and walked through Subura's narrow alleys, feeling like you were entering forbidden land. Cassius's house sat higher up, on the Aventine Hill, overlooking the Forum like a god scorning mortals. The door opened, unguarded. You stepped into flickering oil lamps and hushed voices. Brutus was there, leaning against a column, holding a wine cup he didn't drink. Decimus sat at a table, sketching something on wood, maybe the Curia's layout, or maybe just killing time before killing a man. Others you didn't know by name, but their eyes were the same, calm, silent, bloodthirsty, without expression. Cassius motioned you to sit. No greetings, no formalities. Being a spy in the political world of Rome isn't like a Greek espionage tale. No coded letters, no hooded cloaks, no leaps across rooftops under moonlight, just eyes, subtle nods, words that seem harmless but, whispered into the right ear, can topple an entire resolution. And you, after that fateful dinner at Cassius' house, have stepped into that role, not by plan, not trained, just dragged between two sides with no way back. Each day, you still go to the Curia Pompeii with your wax tablet, your worn tunica, your slightly hunched gait, like any other nameless soul. But now, you listen differently. You look closer. You remember what should be forgotten, and try to forget what no one should know you've heard. Caesar still appears with his calm demeanor and familiar half-smile. He doesn't say much, but when he does, everyone falls silent. When he enters the room, no one dares yawn. When he raises his hand, all seem ready to transcribe words meant for stone. You sit behind him, close enough to see the silver hairs at the nape of his neck, and sometimes you wonder, am I close enough to stab? Then you fear the question itself. Because no one in the conspiracy has dared say who'll strike first, but someone will have to. Outside the sessions, you start meeting Cassius more often, seemingly by chance, in taverns, on streets, by the fish market. He doesn't name names, doesn't signal, just looks. Once he put a hand on your shoulder and asked, "What did Caesar say today?" You answered, "He said this winter will be mild." Cassius gave a dry laugh. Sometimes a weather forecast hints at war. You're not sure if it was a joke or an order. One noon, you're summoned with the other scribes to meet Caesar himself. Your heart nearly jumps out through your tunic's seams. The room is small, just him, a few trusted aides, and you. He sits behind a table, holding an unsealed scroll, eyes scanning each person. Then they stop on you. "You were a soldier, weren't you?" he asks. You nod. 13th Legion. He nods, a flicker of something like regret or memory crossing his face. "I remember my old soldiers, the ones who know how to stay quiet and do good work." You give a weak smile, not sure if it's praise, but definitely a warning. He says nothing more, just a curt order. Keep your eyes, ears and mouth. All three matter. You leave with your back soaked in sweat, like after a battle. From that day, you grow even quieter. But in your head, a voice won't stop. He knows. You report to Brutus, or rather, let slip bits of information while sitting in a tavern corner. Brutus listens, fingering his wine cup without drinking. He doesn't suspect, he says. If he did, you wouldn't be here. But you're not sure. Caesar doesn't kill you for suspicion. He might keep you close, use you, to see what you do next. Rome is a chessboard, and you're a pawn caught between queens. One afternoon, while recording a debate on grain taxes, Caesar suddenly turns to you. What do you think? He asks. The room goes dead silent. Old senators stop fanning themselves. Aides hold their breath. You're not supposed to have opinions, but he asked. You answer slowly. Sir, I think the people will follow whoever listens to them. Caesar looks at you for a long time, then smiles. A safe answer. The room exhales at once. You nearly collapse onto the table. The nights after, you don't sleep. You start doubting everything. Does Brutus truly believe in the ideal? Is Cassius just jealous of glory? And you? What are you in this game? A pawn or a fool thinking he controls the hand holding him? You dream of Caesar, not stabbed, but sitting, drinking wine, looking at you and asking, how are you different from me? You can't answer. You start fearing yourself, because lying comes easier now. You smile at the right moments, stay silent in the right places, and each time you descend another step into the dark pit of betrayal. But there's no dagger yet, no blood. It's still just words, and words are light as air. But everyone knows in Roman politics, whispers are daggers without sheaths, and once they cut, they spill more blood than any forged blade. You're between two sides, and both think you're theirs. But the truth is, you no longer belong to anyone. You're a spy, a two-faced man, and you know at some point, someone will ask, whose side are you on? And then the answer won't be words. It'll be action, and the dagger will have to come out. You meet Brutus not at a grand assembly, not in a solemn Senate session, but in a small garden behind a temple to Apollo, where the air smells of dry leaves, a statue's nose is chipped, and the wind hisses through olive branches, like the universe itself is whispering. Brutus sits there, back against a tree, his white tunica crumpled like it's never met an iron, holding a scroll he doesn't read. When you arrive, he looks up slowly, his eyes not probing like Cassius, not cold like Decimus, but sad, as if he already knows everything coming is wrong, but must be done. You sit beside him, trying not to make noise, but your tattered sandal scrapes the stone loud enough for him to give a faint smile. You came, Brutus says, not using your name, no introductions needed. You know he knows who you are, no formalities, just presence. The air between you is still as a lake, and you're the first to ripple it. They told me to meet you, you say. I met myself once, Brutus replies, eyes distant, and I still haven't decided who that man is. His answer unsettles you. You expected talk of Caesar, reasons for killing, plans, loyalty, but instead, he speaks of himself. And maybe that's what's truly frightening. Brutus isn't like other conspirators. He doesn't have the power-hungry gaze, doesn't stress Rome in every sentence as if it shields all sins. He speaks slowly, softly, like he's writing each word in sand with his finger, knowing waves will soon erase it. Caesar loves me like a son, Brutus says, and I love him like a father. You turn, unable to hide your skeptical look, and you're about to stab your father. Brutus nods, no defense. That's why, if I don't, who will? Who can make his death not a symbol of a tyrant slain? Who can kill him and make it seem justified? You don't know if you're hearing noble reasoning or desperate rationalization. Brutus doesn't want to kill Caesar out of hate. He wants to kill him because he loves him too much, and that love is turning into duty. You ask, what about the people? They won't understand. They love Caesar. Brutus closes his eyes. I don't need them to understand. I need history to understand. A beautiful sentence, a dangerous one, because everyone thinks they can control how history writes them. But you know, history is a wild beast. It doesn't write for the living. It chooses who screams loudest when it's over. So Brutus tells you about sleepless nights, about his wife, Porcia, trembling when she learned he was diving into something irreversible. She stabbed her thigh to prove she could keep a secret, he says, eyes on the ground, and I'm not sure I can keep my soul. You want to ask? Then why do it? But you don't, because the answer is obvious. Brutus believes if he doesn't, he won't be himself anymore, and if he does, He might kill a man but save an ideal. The problem is, ideals don't bleed. People do. Before you leave, Brutus puts a hand on your shoulder. His hand is warm but trembling, not from fear, from standing between two fires, knowing he'll burn in both. When the day comes, he says, don't look into his eyes. Don't let him see regret. Let him see necessity. You nod but aren't sure you can do it, because you remember Caesar's eyes, the way he looks when he trusts someone, and you fear that when the moment comes you'll look into that face and see no necessity, just betrayal. On the way home, you don't feel relieved for understanding Brutus. Instead, you feel deeper in. You thought Brutus was cold, or a certain hero. But no, he's not certain, not steady. He's just decided to leap into the abyss and hope someone follows, and you're following. Not because you believe, but because there's no other path. You don't know if Brutus is a hero or an opportunist. Maybe both, maybe neither. But you know one thing, history will name him, and you'll be the one behind, holding the dagger, not carved on stone, but you'll be there. And in that moment, when the blade pierces the white toga, everyone will know, Brutus didn't kill Caesar alone, never alone. The dinner begins with silence. No lyre strums, no clinking cups, no fake laughs of elites using wine to mask schemes. Just the soft steps of people not wanting to be heard, the wooden door closing like it seals the escape, and the sound of wine cups set on an old clay table, each placement a silent oath. You arrive a bit late, not on purpose, but because you stopped 3 times on the way, once to check if you brought the dagger, once to wonder if you could turn back, and once to look at Rome from the hill, like it's your last time. But you still come. Cassius' house sits in the wealthy quarter, secluded and discreet, like a cut that never heals. Outside, it looks like any Roman noble's villa, stone columns, small garden, a headless god's fountain. But inside, the air thickens. Those around the long table tonight aren't here to celebrate. They're like a secret order about to sign a death warrant for a god. Cassius sits at the head, hand never leaving his wine cup, though he barely drinks. Brutus sits near the end, face lowered, fingers tapping lightly like keeping time to an unwritten dirge. And you, pulled to a table corner, where candlelight flickers like it too wants to look away. Food is served as custom, bread, olives, cheese, some cured meat, but no one touches it. Everyone's hungry, but not for food, for something coming, not yet here, but closing in. Cassius speaks first, his voice drier than the bread. Cassius will be at the Curia on time. We have about 30 seconds from when he sits. Someone cuts in, Antony will be there. Brutus looks up, I'll handle him. A small talk. Another scoffs. Talk with what? Greek philosophy? No one answers. Everyone knows Antony's a problem, but no one dares say it loud, because if Antony's a problem, it means killing another man, and that goes against what Brutus wants to believe. This isn't an assassination. It's a ritual, a sacrifice, a noble necessity. You're not sure you buy it. You look around the table and see resolved faces. Decimus, cold as stone. Trebonius, lips pursed like he's memorized his role. Ligarius, still coughing but hand ready on his dagger's hilt. Then you see your own hand, not trembling, but not steady. And you see something scarier than fear. You're getting used to preparing to kill. Cassius slides a small cloth toward you. Inside is the dagger he gave you last week, now sharpened, its blade gleaming like a polished ideal. Keep it inside your cloak, he says. When he stands, that's the only chance. Brutus adds, soft as a breath, we won't hack, we'll stab. Light, precise, no chaos. He deserves an honorable death. You want to laugh, but don't, because no one here laughs. Even Cassius, usually sharp with mockery, is solemn as a Capitoline statue. Later they discuss each move, who stands where, who signals, who strikes first. You're placed behind Caesar's chair, slightly to the left, because his strong hand is his right. We don't want him fighting back if he reacts in time. That sentence makes you imagine for the first time, what if Caesar turns in time? What if he blocks? What if he looks straight at you, says your name, and asks why? You have no answer. Brutus ends the dinner with a short line no one forgets. We're not killing a man, we're killing a possibility. The possibility that Rome will have a king. Everyone stands at once. No one clinks cups. No one wishes luck. No one says a final word. You leave with the dagger on you, stomach empty, mouth bitter, mind heavier than ever. On the way, you hear children playing soldiers and Caesar. One shouts, "Ave, Imperator." The others bow, shouting back. You look and see clearly, even if Caesar dies tomorrow, people will still call his name, maybe louder, maybe longer. And you'll be one of the nameless shadows in that story, a killer for an ideal, or because you couldn't say no to a dinner invitation. And in your heart a voice whispers, you came, you sat down, you took the dagger. From now on, there's no way back. The last night before the Ides of March, you don't sleep. No one in the conspiracy sleeps, but only you don't try to hide it. You lie on your warped wooden bed, eyes on the cracked ceiling where a spider weaves its web, and you envy it. At least it knows what it's doing. You don't. The dagger lies under your pillow, its wooden hilt slick with hand sweat, its blade short enough to hide under a toga, but long enough to kill if it hits right. You've drawn it 3 times in the dark, practicing a quick pull without snagging fabric, even the reverse grip Cassius taught. Each time you draw it, your heart beats like a drum at a sacrifice. You once thought war was the worst thing, but war has rules. Trumpets, retreat orders. This is an execution in a toga, a stabbing in a hall where blood will soak marble next to where Cicero's letters were read. You recall Brutus's words, "Don't look into his eyes," but you know you will, because you always look. Because eyes are the one thing you can't lie to, and the one thing that'll follow you to death. The room is dark as a well's mouth. You don't light a lamp, don't eat dinner, don't pray. You just sit, hand on the dagger, mind so empty, you hear your own breaths. You think of Caesar, of the first time you saw him step onto a speaking platform. He stood tall, chin up, arms wide, like embracing all of Rome. He didn't shout, he whispered, and the whole forum went silent. Then, you knew you were seeing something bigger than a man, and tomorrow you'll stab that something. Not out of hate, but because you don't know another way to live in a world where that something is growing. You get up before the roosters crow, put on your cleanest tunica, drape the white toga you washed yesterday, though it still has stains, oil, or old blood, you're not sure. The dagger is tucked at your side, hidden under folded fabric. You look in a bronze mirror, face pale, lips dry, eyes, not clearly anyone's, a killer's, or a man about to be killed. You leave before the first light hits Jupiter's temple roof. The streets are quiet, just early bread sellers, and a drunk slumped by a fountain. You pass the market, hearing a vendor cry, "Buy quick before it's too late." Who knows if you'll live tomorrow? You almost laugh. Cassius waits at the Curia's entrance. He says nothing, just nods. His eyes are calm, but his hand trembles too. Brutus arrives later, quieter still. Everyone gathers in the back hallway, pretending to discuss a new resolution, but all know the hour has come. When a guard shouts, "Caesar approaches," your heart splits in two. His footsteps echo. Caesar enters, slow, majestic, in a red toga with gold trim, eyes scanning each person. Then he smiles. Not the smile of a fooled man, but of one who knows, yet walks on. You stand close behind, less than an arm's length. Your hand grips the dagger's hilt. Brutus signals by adjusting his sleeve, a small, harmless move, but the agreed sign. Caesar sits. The speech begins. You hear no words, just blood pounding in your ears. Then, it's your turn. A quick, decisive move. You draw the dagger, and that's the moment you're no longer free. You're the one who bloodies history. And Caesar turns, not to Cassius, not to Decimus, to you, only you. No words, just eyes, a slight nod, and then, those eyes are gone. Right then, you know last night was your last chance to turn back. From now on, every path leads to blood, dreams, and the shadow of a man who fell because of hands that once called him friend. The Ides of March begins like any other day. Clear skies, light breeze, sparrows chirping from Vesta's temple roof, and people gathering in the forum to gossip, trade, and tell stories that'll later be written in history books like a staged tragedy. But you know the truth. You know today isn't ordinary. Today is the day blood will soak marble, the day your dagger will tear through a white toga like a wordless answer to a question no one dares ask. Who has the right to kill a man like Caesar? You arrive at the Curia early, not out of eagerness, but fear of being late. Fear of missing history's moment. Fear that cowardice will make you absent when it all begins. Everything's ready. Brutus stands near the entrance, face stern like he's about to indict a god. Cassius paces, hand gripping his dagger's hilt under his cloak, like he fears it'll vanish. Decimus whispers to a guard to ensure Caesar's plans don't change last minute. And you stand behind a column, feeling your heart no longer beat in rhythm, but pound a funeral march with your guts. When Caesar arrives, the Curia's air freezes. He walks in, slow but unfaltering, deep red toga, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, eyes direct, like he knows something will happen today, and chooses to face it. They'll later say he was lured here, but you see him then and know he wasn't lured. He chose to come. He chose to enter where at least 60 men with daggers pose as good citizens. He chose death, or at least didn't step back from it. He speaks a few opening words. You don't remember them, because your hand is gripping the dagger's hilt so tight, your nails dig into skin. You're not trembling anymore. Not from courage. You've passed trembling. You've turned to stone. Brutus signals. A small move adjusting his collar. Cassius steps forward. He says something about a land petition. Just a pretext. Caesar nods. I'll consider it, he says. Cassius stops him. No, sir. Consider it now. Caesar looks at him. I've answered. Decimus steps in, pretending to mediate. Another man joins, then another, and then the first dagger is drawn. Casca, a clumsy stab, grazing the shoulder. Caesar turns, smile gone. Casca, you traitor, he cries. Then other blades rush in like starving beasts. No one speaks, no one shouts, just the sound of tearing cloth, spurting blood, shuffled feet, and broken breaths. You don't recall when you stabbed, just your hand thrusting, pulling back, blood on your hand, sleeve, chin. Caesar falls, bracing against a stone pedestal. He tries to stand. Cassius stabs again. Decimus whispers something in his ear. Brutus steps forward last. The room stops. Caesar looks at him. The spiritual father and the honorable son face each other. No words left. Brutus raises his dagger. Caesar doesn't dodge, doesn't ask, doesn't blame, just looks and whispers, Et tu, brute. Not a question, not an accusation, just acknowledgement. Then he collapses against Pompey's statue base. The right place, the right spot, the right man. Blood flows, staining the toga red, pooling on marble like ink writing history. You stand there, in the room, dagger in hand, drenched in sweat, not knowing who struck last, who struck most, who didn't strike. It's all a haze. When the blood stops, when Caesar's body stills, the room feels drained of sound. Someone vomits in a corner. Another cries. Cassius pants, like he ran half of Rome. Brutus stands still, eyes closed, hand limp. You look around and see, no one feels glorious. No one feels they've freed Rome. Everyone just feels tired and dirty and unsure if what they did was right. Someone shouts, now, to the square. Cry out the tyrant is dead. No one responds, because no one believes Caesar was a tyrant. Not now, not when he fell like a man. You look at the blood on your hand and realize you're not who you were. Not a 13th Legion veteran, not a scribe, not an idealist. You're the one who bloodied Caesar, and no Tiber river water is clean enough to wash that sin away. You step out of the Curia. The people don't know yet. Rome still lives. But you've already died. At least the part of you that believed in justice, sacrifice, and necessity. Caesar is dead, and you're part of it. No taking it back, no fixing it, no forgetting. And his eyes, that final look, it'll follow you for life. Not as a curse, but as a memory. The memory of a man once called your friend. You thought after Caesar's death, Rome would hold its breath, that the air would freeze like the blood pooled on the Curia's stone, that the people would bow their heads in silence, as if at a divine funeral, that history would pause for a beat, to mark the death of a man who held the fate of an unborn empire. But Rome doesn't stay silent. Instead, it starts to roar. The first sounds come not from the square but from within you. Your heartbeat out of rhythm, blood rushing in your ears, breath short, like someone fleeing a murder. Because yes, That's exactly what you've done. You step out of the Curia, among the crowd of stabbers, none speaking, none meeting eyes, moving like human-shaped shadows, as if Caesar's blood drained the language from their mouths. The sun is still high, the wind still blows, but Rome begins to change. The news spreads faster than any dagger. Caesar has been killed, in the Curia Pompeii, by those he trusted. At first it's whispers. A market woman screams when she hears, dropping her basket of eggs. A group of kids playing orator scatter in panic. Then footsteps grow louder. A soldier runs to the temple of Castor, shouting, "Caesar is dead." A drunk yells back, joking again, "He fined me yesterday." But the pale face of the messenger isn't joking. Within an hour, the Forum Roman erupts like a kicked beehive. You and the assassins hide in the temple of Jupiter Stator. Cassius shoves the stone door shut, panting like a man who barely escaped death, not one who just dealt it. Inside, no one speaks. Brutus paces, muttering, wiping blood still seeping into his toga's hem. Trebonius slumps to the ground, eyes distant as if he left his soul in the Curia. You, still not believing you're alive, peel off your outer cloak, check your hand. Dried blood clings to your wrist, flecked under your nails. You think, if Rome is truly freed, why do I feel like a fugitive? Outside, the crowd's noise grows. Some wail, some scream for vengeance, some shout that the murderers killed a god. Brutus finally speaks. We must address the people, explain, make them see this wasn't betrayal, but saving Rome. Cassius spits on the floor. The people don't want to understand. They just want someone to bleed for them. But they decide, tomorrow to the square, to speak openly, justify the blood, turn the killing into an act of justice. You nod, though your heart is empty. You don't know who you want to convince. You're not sure you even believe yourself. That night, Rome doesn't sleep. Neither do you. In alleys, in tenements, in taverns, people talk endlessly. Caesar was stabbed by his own, in broad daylight. No trial, no charges. They ask, if a man like him can be killed, who's safe? That question is scarier than any dagger, because Caesar didn't die alone. He took the city's sense of safety with him. The next morning, as you step into the square, the sky is overcast, as if Rome itself is debating whether to forgive or punish. Brutus climbs the steps, standing above the crowd, raising a hand for silence. You stand behind him, eyes scanning. The crowd is bigger than you thought, angrier than you imagined. Brutus begins. He speaks of ideals, of the danger of absolute power, of how Caesar was turning Rome into a throne, and its people into slaves. He speaks well, timed perfectly, on point. At times, the crowd is silent. At times they clap, and you almost believe it'll be okay. Then Mark Antony steps up. You see him from afar, his eyes not those of a mourner, but of a man seeking revenge. And you know silence isn't Rome's choice. Rome has begun to roar, and you, just a gasping breath in the brewing storm. Caesar is dead, but Rome has just woken up, and it's hungry. Hungry for truth, hungry for blood, hungry for someone to answer for it. And the crowd's eyes, for the first time, turn to you. You thought the dagger's work ended when it left Caesar's body, but it turns out it only changed direction. And this time, the point isn't aimed at him. It's aimed at you, at Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, Ligarius, all of you. Rome doesn't need time to reflect, to verify, to weigh right and wrong. Rome just needs an excuse, and Caesar's blood is enough. Right after Brutus's speech, when he says, "I loved Caesar, but I loved Rome more," the crowd stays quiet. A few nod, some clap, others just stare, unsure whether to cheer or fear. But then Mark Antony steps forward, and everything shifts like a hot wind from the earth. Antony doesn't accuse anyone. He simply lays Caesar's blood-soaked toga on a wooden platform, spreading it like a shroud for history, and begins to speak. No slogans, no wails, just a low, steady voice, occasionally breaking, like a man holding himself together. "They tell me not to speak ill of these men," he says, his eyes sweeping over you. "They're honorable men. They say they killed Caesar for your sake. For you, so let me tell you what Caesar did for you." And he starts reading the will, a real one, a document Caesar left, never made public. In it, he gave most of his wealth to the people, left gardens for the poor, left money for every adult Roman citizen, named, listed, accounted for. And Rome, the city that once cheered Caesar's victories, now trembles like someone realizing they aided in killing their father. Antony ends by bowing to the bloodied toga, voice choked. Here's the stab from Casca, here's Cassius's, here's Decimus, and this is Brutus's, the one he trusted most. No one shouts, no one moans, no one needs to. Because in that silence, a fire is kindled, and minutes later, it becomes a storm. The crowd breaks, some yell, kill them, some hurl stones at the Curia. A group topples Brutus's statue. You stand at the edge, trying to avoid the people's eyes, but you can't. A child points at you. That's him. I saw his face yesterday, with Brutus. You turn away, but it's too late. A crushed grape hits your back, then a small stone, then the sound of running feet. You slip into a narrow alley, ditch your toga, cover your face with a cloth, heart pounding like war drums. Elsewhere in the city, Cassius's house burns. People think he's inside. They don't care if it's true. They throw torches, shouting. Brutus's house is broken into. They burn his effigy before Jupiter's temple. Not because he killed Caesar, but because he betrayed a symbol, a man the people thought was theirs. You hide in an old tenement, where the landlord doesn't know your real name. Each night, shouts echo, blood for blood. A makeshift militia hunts traitors. They catch a man thinking he's sinner, one of the conspirators, but it's the wrong sinner. A poet. They kill him anyway. No reason needed. Just the name. You know your turn is coming. You're not named in poems, not a leader, not Brutus, but you were there. You held the dagger. And Rome doesn't distinguish. Those who killed Caesar, helped kill, or stood nearby, all owe blood. Cassius sends word. We must flee. Brutus vanishes from Rome overnight. The others either hide or die. You pack in silence. Leave the room, the name, the past. Take a bag of coins, a new tunica, and a memory you can't wash clean. As you leave the city, dawn breaks. Rome behind you still smokes. Alarms sound. Temple bells ring. The people who once cheered Caesar's triumphs now cheer the deaths of those who thought they were heroes. And you understand, the dagger didn't just stab Caesar, it turned on you, on Brutus, on Rome itself. And Rome, like any empire, always avenges with hunger, for justice, for kinship, for blood. And you, who thought you were killing to free, are now just a shadow bearing guilt, running through the ashes of a city that never forgives. You're no longer a Roman citizen, not a soldier, not a scribe, not anyone. You're a target, a name not carved on stone, but etched in the whispered hit lists of Rome's people, like a ritual. No one needs to know exactly who you are. They just know you were in the Curia that day. You held the dagger, and that's enough for the city, the state, the part-time executioners, and the nameless, eager to prove loyalty to the mob, to spill your blood. You flee Rome near dawn, not through the main gate, but crawling through a collapsed wall, by an old canal, where beggars gather at night to soak up warm steam. You lie in the mud, listening to soldiers' boots on stone, hand clutching the coin bag, and the small dagger you kept from the day you stabbed Caesar. Its blade now rusted, but you don't discard it. Not because you need a weapon, but because you fear, if you throw it away, it'll return in dreams. You think leaving the city will bring relief, but the truth is, Rome follows you, in every step, every breath, every suspicious glance, from a roadside water cellar, on the Appian Way, all roads lead to Rome. A saying you once found poetic, now becomes a nightmare. Wherever you go, it's like returning to the place you fled, and it's not just people chasing you. The first night, sleeping in an abandoned granary, you dream of the Curia, but no people, just blood, blood seeping from the stone, from the ceiling, from cracks you thought were times where. Then Caesar walks in, no toga, no words, just staring, not angry, not accusing, just disappointed. And as he steps closer, you wake, soaked in sweat, mouth screaming silently. You tell no one, because no one's with you. Since fleeing, you pose as a merchant, wandering from rest stop to tavern, avoiding eyes, names, mirrors. At a checkpoint, a soldier asks where you're from. You say, Capua, He looks at you like Capua sprouted on your forehead. You add, "I trade oil." He laughs. Your hands don't smell of oil, they smell of blood, but he lets you pass. Maybe he's tired, maybe he's right. Another night, you reach Ostia, hoping to board a ship to Greece, but the port master stares too long. You see a broken bust of Caesar under his table, half its face smashed, but the other half watches you. You turn away, leave the port, no ticket bought, not for lack of money, but because no ship can outrun memory. You head north, through hills, forests, villages that haven't heard of the assassination, but their eyes still suspect. You claim to be a healer. An old woman brings her feverish son. You apply leaves, blow air, mutter something like a prayer. The boy dies by morning. You flee the village at night. So, no one chases you, but you run anyway. Not from fear of discovery, but because you're starting to see, you carry death. You're no longer sure what's a hallucination. One night, you hear footsteps behind you for 3 hours. You turn. Nothing. You hide in bushes. Wait. Hold your breath. Then hear a whisper. Et tu. No one speaks, but you hear it clear as a blade at your neck. You bolt from the bushes. Trip. Hit your head on a rock. Blood flows. You lie there, laughing like a madman. You think, is this my death? Not stabbed, not hanged, but running from a ghost. Then you pass out, head bloody, mouth still muttering. You should have stayed, should have confessed, should have died with him. The next morning you wake, still alive, still you, but another part dead inside, and you realize your hunter needs no sword, no arrows. He just needs to be in your head, and he's there. Caesar doesn't chase you, but the thought of him does. You can outrun every soldier, every angry citizen, every trap, but not the simplest question, did you do the right thing? And each time you hear it, you can't answer, because you don't know. And maybe that's the worst punishment, not hanging, but living, with yourself, with the dagger you once thought was for an ideal, now just blood, and the quiet footsteps that never stop behind you. You leave Rome at the crack of dawn, not as a victor, but as a fugitive. The tattered toga means nothing, as you slip through dark alleys, reeking of damp earth and animal dung, your footsteps echoing like the screams of a past you can't discard. The Appian Way is freezing, the wind gusting, as if trying to blow away the fear clinging to your heart. Hunger and cold aren't your greatest enemies, but the betrayal within, the betrayal of yourself. You thought leaving Rome would make things better, but you didn't know each step away from the city sinks you deeper into a pit of despair and loneliness. Villagers along the way don't welcome a man who smells of blood. You eat stale bread, drink from dirty streams that taste sweeter than any lavish feast before. At night, you curl up in a thin cloak, huddling against a ruined shack's wall, where howling dogs and buzzing insects form the most terrifying symphony of your life. You dream of Caesar, not as a dead man, but a living shadow, standing in a market, staring at you with cold, wordless accusation. In that dream, you run but never escape. You wake, drenched in sweat, knowing this flight isn't just from pursuers but from yourself. On the third night, you meet a Roman patrol, their eyes like bloodthirsty wolves piercing the dark. You hide in a haystack, hearing their steps close in, your heart ready to burst. But instead of capture, you're spared because one soldier recognizes you as a former comrade under Caesar, a reason enough not to die on the spot, but not enough for forgiveness or welcome. You press on, through forests, empty fields, lands where people still whisper of Caesar's death like a curse. You're no longer the mastermind of a grand plot, just an exile, a wandering ghost, living off strangers' pity and breadcrumbs. Hunger and cold gnaw at your strength, and you know if you don't find a safe haven, death will come faster than any pursuer. But what's worse is the abandonment, not just by allies, but by the ideal that once shielded you. You recall secret meetings, promises, plans woven with blood and tears, now shattered scraps under your feet. You start doubting yourself. Was what you did to save Rome, or just a fool's tale of survival at any cost? One evening, as icy east winds cut through your thin cloak, you find an abandoned hut by the road where an old woman lets you stay. She doesn't ask your name, your story, just hands you a cup of warm water and a torn blanket. For the first time in weeks, the air doesn't feel heavy, no smell of blood, no ghosts. But you know, when you step out tomorrow, you're still a fugitive, hunted by the mob, by history, by your own mind. You clasp your hands, praying not for forgiveness, but for strength to keep going. Rome betrayed you, you betrayed Rome, and now you stand between two worlds belonging to neither. You don't know if you'll ever return to the city as a free man, but you know each step now is a fresh cut in your bleeding heart. You're still alive, but not the old you. You're a survivor amid the ashes of self-betrayal. Rumors begin to creep like thin mist into the empire's farthest corners, where torchlight never reaches, where fugitives like you must dodge every shadow. They say Caesar isn't dead. They say he escaped death, fled through dense forests, crossed wide seas, and is raising a new army to avenge those who stabbed him in the back. At first you laugh. Why would a man like Caesar, whom you saw collapse on the Curia's stone, still live? But the stories grow persistent. In every roadside tavern, from a grain merchant's mouth, a soothsayer's lips, you hear tales exaggerated, embellished, becoming a legend more vivid than truth. They say on the night of the assassination, Caesar didn't fall. He vanished in a trance, an ancient Greek spell, to return from that darkness. You don't believe it, but you can't deny, it makes you tremble. If Caesar lives, it means those who stabbed him were just traitors sacrificing for a soulless corpse. It means the real war hasn't ended. It means your flight is just the start of a nightmare. You hear news from other fugitives, former allies of Caesar, or his soldiers. They say in the northeast, Caesar is gathering an elite force, Gallic warriors, mercenaries from nearby provinces. Even Pompey's old followers now turn to him. The rumors spread to the outpost where you hide. One night, by a fire, a stranger whispers, "If Caesar lives, trust no one, especially those who once called you friend." You listen, knowing fear won't keep you alive longer, but unable to stop your heart from tightening. Each day you peer out at the road, watching Roman soldiers pass, unsure if they're friend or foe, because anyone could carry that question. If Caesar lives, whose side should we take? You feel the change in the air. Rome is no longer the city of compromise and politics you knew. It's becoming a battlefield, where a rumor can spark slaughter, where a name can decide hundreds of lives. You think of long nights wandering forests, icy rivers, hungry days, and wonder if Caesar truly returns. Is there a place for you in this world? Or will you be the next target, the traitor of traitors, abandoned by the forces clashing in the dark? In your dreams, Caesar isn't a fallen general, but his piercing eyes, reading your soul. He doesn't ask why you stabbed him, but, "Are you ready for when I return?"
Each morning you wake heavy, as if carrying an invisible dagger, cutting deeper than any flesh wound.
You're no longer sure what to believe. History, rumors, or yourself. Because every rumor is a double-edged blade, capable of saving or killing you. But one thing you know, this life can't last. And if Caesar lives, the apocalypse for traitors is just beginning. You swallow hard, quietly preparing. For the days ahead, when the dagger isn't just from the past, but the future, waiting in the dark. Marcus Antonius wasn't the man you thought would become your greatest adversary. While you were still in the shadows, fleeing the wrath of Rome's mobs, Antony's name was just a distant echo from meetings, vague reports, and street rumors. But now, he's the embodiment of the fiercest storm, an enemy you can't face, can't evade, and can't defeat with old conspiracies. Antony is cunning, ferocious, and unrelenting. He knows how to ignite hatred in the people's hearts, how to turn a speech into a tempest that sweeps away all reason. You hear he stood on the forum's platform, eyes blazing, voice deep and commanding, convincing the crowd that Caesar wasn't just a general but a god, a symbol of Rome no one had the right to touch. His words don't just reach the people's hearts, they pierce yours. Fear, guilt, and a sense of betrayal. You once thought Antony was just a loyal aide, Caesar's friend, but now he's a monster of Roman politics, ready to use any means to hold power and avenge his master's death. You recall meeting him at a secret gathering, his gaze cold as a hunting eagle, his low voice saying, "Don't think Rome has only one dead king, we'll make the traitors pay." You knew those weren't just threats, they were a declaration of war, a challenge you couldn't refuse. Antony doesn't just hunt you with soldiers and laws, but with a web of spies, schemes more intricate than anything you've seen. He can make you pray even amidst a crowd, with hundreds passing by. You hear how he persuaded mobs to burn the homes of those suspected in the assassination, how he used pamphlets, speeches, and public ceremonies to manipulate opinion. You wonder how someone can be so cunning while burning with such ruthless passion. Antony seizes moments and turns them into his own chessboard. Once he invited you to a small feast at his house. Unlike Cassius' cold, tense dinner, this was filled with music, fine wine, and fake laughter. Antony looked at you, gave a half smile, and said, "Rome can't live in shadows forever. Someone must lead it to light." You didn't know what he meant, but his eyes never left you. The feast ended with a gentle but undeniable invitation. Think it over. There might still be a place for you in the new Rome. But you know Antony's new Rome is a different world. A world with no place for those like you, who held the dagger that stabbed Caesar, branded as criminals, traitors, relics of a past. Antony once erased. You flee not just from soldiers, but from Antony's control over information, the people, even your closest allies. You feel more lost than ever in this chaotic world, with no true allies, where every step could lead to a deadly trap. Antony is unpredictable, not just for his planning, but for his ability to turn defeat into victory and create opportunity from chaos. You wonder if you can survive this storm, if there's any safe place in a Rome turning into a political battlefield. You know that, though Caesar is gone, the war never ended, and Marcus Antonius, the most unpredictable man you've ever faced, will decide your fate. That day, the Forum Roman was packed. The crowd's roar rose like ocean waves, not just from curiosity, but from unprecedented fear and anger. You stood at the edge, trying to hide behind a dirty cloak, eyes fixed on Mark Antony as he stepped onto the speaking platform. You'd heard rumors of this speech, carefully crafted to turn the tide, make murderers pitiable, betrayal a tragedy. And you wondered, can words change history's course? Antony began by calling Brutus honorable. The phrase rang out, a challenge, leaving the crowd stunned and skeptical. Brutus is honorable, Antony repeated, his warm but forceful voice carving each word into every listener's mind. He spoke of Brutus's loyalty to Caesar, their deep friendship, late-night talks about Rome's future. Antony painted a devoted son, a trusted friend, a guardian of a faltering republic. But then he twisted into the unexplainable contradiction. Yet that man stabbed his spiritual father, the one he loved more than his own life. The crowd quieted, light nods turning to heavy sighs. You felt the air shift, doubt, anger, pain. Antony didn't stop. He held up Caesar's blood-soaked cloak, a vivid testament, drawing every eye to the crimson stains on white fabric. "Look," he said, "this isn't just a murdered man's blood. It's the blood of betrayed trust, of a city stabbed in the heart." You heard whispers spread, some sobbing, others cursing. Antony pressed on, turning history, stories and figures into an undeniable indictment. He spoke of Caesar's mercy, reforms for the poor, how he gave his wealth to those with nothing. Each tale was a hammer striking the cold stone of justifications Brutus and others built. You stood watching the crowd change by the minute. Those who once cheered Brutus now glared at him as a brutal traitor. You recalled anxious nights, months of silent planning, and wondered if Brutus ever heard this speech, realizing what he'd become in the people's eyes. When Antony finished, the crowd erupted. Shouts of "Caesar lives forever" shook the air. You saw stones, bricks fly, chairs toppled. You saw Brutus bow his head. No response, just a man about to fall under the fury he sparked. You felt clearly, change had come, not by daggers, but by words, by the power of a speech, a story retold, an emotion spreading through the city. You're no longer a bystander, you're part of history being rewritten. And you know, whatever tomorrow brings, Antony's speech will echo in Rome's heart, in the minds of survivors, a reminder that in the fight for power, words cut sharper than any blade. You leave the square with a heavy heart, knowing you and the others will never escape the shadow of what happened. And Antony's words will be the fire burning every ideal you once held. After Mark Antony's speech, you're no longer a silent shadow in the crowd. You've been exposed, condemned by the people's eyes, words and oppressive silence. You're not just the one who stabbed Caesar. You're now sentenced in a public trial with no lawyer, no defense, only judgment by the mob's rage and Antony's faction's power. Rumors about you spread like wildfire in a dry season, each person adding a bit, turning you into a symbol of betrayal, depravity, a fateful night that changed Rome's destiny forever. You don't know if you can look in a mirror without recognizing what that face has become. You're not the person you were, not part of a quiet rebellion. You're the city's criminal, the target of curses and hateful stares. One morning, hiding in a dilapidated house in the outskirts, a knock shakes the place like an earthquake. You know it's not a stranger. Outside are Antony's soldiers, holding a list of enemies, eyes merciless. They burst in, bind you, and drag you out, amid the crowd's curiosity and hatred. The trial is held in the Forum, where you'd walked hundreds of times, now the place branding you a murderer. You stand before a council, not of senators, but of enraged citizens, demanding justice for Caesar. You try to stay calm, but your voice falters, defense is clumsy. They ask, why kill Caesar? You reply, for Rome. They sneer, Rome doesn't need father killers. You have no allies, no evidence, no laws to protect you, only the truth in your heart, which no one wants to hear. You're a traitor, a killer, the one who shattered a dream. The trial ends quickly. You're sentenced to death, not by words, but by the crowd's eyes, their shouts, their unshakable fury. On the way to execution, you see shadows of family, friends, now turning away. You realize you're the loneliest man in Roman history, not for your crime, but for the choice that cost you everything. You're no one in this story anymore, a shadow of the past, a disgrace in the present, a lesson for the future. And as the final wind brushes your neck, you can't help but wonder, does any part of you still believe you did right? Or were you just a dreamer, a fool mistaking honor for crime? In your last moment, you look at Rome's sky, no longer a city of light and hope, but a graveyard of broken dreams and unkept oaths. You die not just by the blade, but by history's oblivion, not named in books but a faint shadow. People try to forget. That's your final sentence. You can't die. Not yet. Despite the sentence, despite your weary body, despite the cold images of former allies haunting your mind, you keep running. You flee to the vast eastern Roman desert, where parched land and dust cling to your skin like they want to swallow you. This isn't ordinary flight. It's a battle for survival among ghosts and relentless assassins. Narrow paths cut through the desert like knife wounds in the earth, and you must choose the right one to evade Antony's men, Octavians, even ruthless bounty hunters. By day, scorching heat makes each step heavy as stone. By night, freezing cold feels like shattered ice under a faint moon. You sleep in caves, wrapped in a tattered cloak, hearing the wind howl like an unending curse. Every small sound wakes you, breath held, listening. You know it's not just soldiers hunting you, but other traitors, former allies turned by fear or greed. Once you nearly got caught hiding under a bush near a dry well. A patrol stopped, questioned, their eyes not seeking allies but prey. You gripped your dagger, ready to fight, but a distant cry made them leave. You exhaled, knowing luck is fleeting. The days after, you trudge through barren valleys where birds don't sing, where sand blankets, paths like a cold shroud. You recall Brutus's words, Caesar's eyes, your mother's warning. Loyalty is a narrow path, but it doesn't always lead to light. You've long strayed from light. One night, by a small fire, surrounded by a few wanderers like you, one speaks of an army advancing east, bearing Caesar's unfaded banner. You listen, unsure whether to feel hope or panic. Maybe Caesar lives, maybe he'll return, and if so, what will you do? You have no answer. You only know that no matter where you run, the past hunts you fiercer than desert wolves. Each night, in dreams, you stand in a desolate field, chased by faceless, nameless figures with angry eyes. You run until exhaustion, but never escape. Waking, you're still alive, but your heart is dead. You live in weary waiting, amid hunger, fevers, unrelenting doubt. You don't know how long you can hide, who you'll see last, or if anyone will remember a name erased from history. But one thing you know, life in the desert, among assassins, isn't for the weak, and you have no choice but to become the strongest in absolute solitude. You lie in the darkness of a wild hut, where wind slips through cracks like the past's unyielding moans. Each night, the ghosts aren't just shadows from the fire's flickering light, but vivid images rising from your mind's depths, stirring inescapable obsessions. Caesar, no longer a dead man, but an unavoidable figure, appearing in every dream with cold eyes and a faintly bitter smile. He stands in a blood-stained toga, walking Rome's stone paths, You're no longer allowed to tread, his eyes piercing every corner of your soul, probing invisible wounds. You try to look away, but can't, because he's not just in dreams but beside you, breathing silent reproaches on your neck. You see the Curia Pompeii again, daggers drawn, silent screams before history's wrath. You hear each footstep, cloth tearing, the smell of blood mingling with cold marble, feeling each stab as if still hot on your skin. You try to scream, but it becomes a hopeless sigh. Not just Caesar, but Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, trusted allies, now ghosts haunting every moment. Each is an unanswered question, a deep gnawing about ideals, honor, betrayal. You see them on a precipice, between choice and ruin, their eyes weary but unregretful. Sometimes, you dream of yourself holding the dagger, no longer a tool of killing, but a mirror, reflecting every wrong choice, every lost step. You don't know if you're the killer, or fate's victim, free or a prisoner of your own decisions. The ghosts in your dreams aren't just images, but voices, reproaches, questions, pleas you can't answer.
Why?
How? Was it worth it? Questions echoing relentlessly, waking you at night, soaked in sweat, heart racing. Sometimes, you think you hear the crowd's mocking laughter from the forum, shouts of traitor like sharp knives to your heart. You can't escape these dreams. They're like black wolves in a night forest, stalking, never relenting. You try to build another world of peace, light, forgiveness, but your mind's reality won't allow it. You look in a mirror, but don't recognize the face, only a tortured shadow haunted by irreversible choices. You wonder if these ghosts will ever fade, if you'll ever sleep soundly, without waking to stare into endless void. In those fleeting moments, you realize the most terrifying truth. These ghosts don't just appear in dreams, they live in you, following every step, making each waking day a new battle with yourself. You know you can't escape, can't forget, can't forgive. You'll carry these ghosts, like an invisible steel collar, forever bound to the fate of a man who stabbed Rome's heart. You meet Brutus again in a small Macedonian village, where wind sweeps through golden wheat fields and autumn sun gilds olive trees. No heroic aura or leader's pride. Brutus stands weary, his face lined like he's fought battles, not just with enemies, but with himself. His eyes no longer shine as they did on the Senate's platform, replaced by a depth of pain and despair, etched in every wrinkle. You face him, feeling both familiar and estranged, like seeing someone once known now, a ghost of the past. Brutus doesn't greet or smile, he just looks at you, silent. The silence stretches so long you think you hear dry leaves fall. Finally he speaks in a low, sad voice, as if to himself more than you. We chose this path, but no one knows how far we'll go. You want to ask if he regrets it, if he thinks of that day, the daggers, the broken oaths, but the words stick in your throat. Brutus continues, I once believed this was the only way to save Rome, but now I see. Maybe I was wrong. You feel the collapse in his words, an indescribable despair. He tells of sleepless nights, months fighting, not just enemies but ghosts in his soul. Every time I look in a mirror, I don't see a hero, just a traitor who killed a man I called father. His words sting like salt in a wound. Maybe you carry that feeling too, the unavoidable confrontation with your own wrong choices. Brutus recalls Caesar's last words, et tu, Brute, echoing in his mind, nightly, a curse he can't lift. If I could go back, I wouldn't hold the dagger. He sighs, eyes to the sky. But time doesn't let us fix mistakes. You stand silent, knowing no words can comfort a man bearing a dream's ruin. Brutus looks at you, eyes sharp as knives, but human, saying, I don't know what comes next, but I know one thing. I'm not the man I was, and maybe none of us are. Your heart chokes. This meeting isn't a new plan's start, but an end to a long, painful journey. Brutus is no longer the leader you admired, just a man lost, wrestling with his actions' consequences. As you part, he gives you a look of pity and duty. Take care of yourself, and don't forget, we're all losers in this story. You turn away, heart heavy, carrying a despair you know will never leave. That's the last time you see Brutus, a hero or opportunist, now just a ghost of the history you both wrote with blood and tears. The Battle of Philippi was not the place you imagined in your dreams as a fugitive skulking through deserts and forests. It held no glow of victory, no resounding drums or triumphant cries of Roma Invicta. that you heard in childhood tales. Instead, Philippi was a cold, fog-shrouded land of death, where each step felt heavy with centuries of guilt and regret. You stood on a vast plain, watching armies stretch like rivers of cold iron, two sides poised to clash in the final battle to decide Rome's fate. On one side, the forces of Marcus Antonius and Octavianus, powerful, spirited, backed by the people's will and rising authority. On your side, Brutus and Cassius's faction, the last remnants of the Republic's dream, clinging to a shattered past. You, once a fugitive, now forced to wield a sword, stood on the battlefield, not just for survival, but for honor, or at least for your own existence. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, damp earth, and unspent gunpowder. You heard the wind whistle through dry grass, hissing curses for those about to die. You recalled your days in hiding, haunted dreams, and your final meeting with Brutus, when he still held faint hope of victory. You gripped your sword, hands trembling but unwavering. It wasn't your first sword, but it was the one that would decide everything. That morning, as fog veiled the battlefield, Brutus stood before the troops, his voice ringing through the chill. We fight not for ourselves, but for freedom, for Rome. Cheers rose like a storm, each man drawing strength from the shared oath. You charged with the ranks, heart pounding faster each second, gripping the sword's hilt as if letting go would make you vanish in the tempest of death. The battle began. The clash of swords deafened, screams, gasps, and falls wove into a symphony of life and death. You ran, struck, dodged, slashed, but each cut carried the pain of the past, of betrayal, of ghosts that never relented. You saw Cassius nearby, his eyes blazing with fight, but heavy with sorrow. Brutus wielded his sword calmly, as if battling not just enemies but himself. Each glance at him made you wonder, does this man truly believe in what he's doing? You were thrust into fierce skirmishes, where blood stained the ground in patches. Fallen soldiers lay scattered, their gasping breaths and faint moans making you tremble. You were no longer the fugitive of old. Now you were a warrior, surviving in a chaotic storm of betrayal and war. The battle dragged on for hours, you surrounded, fighting back, slipping in blood but not falling. A missed stab, a blade grazing your ear. You felt death's heat close by, but you lived, you fought, you had no other choice. As the sun began to set, you looked around, seeing many comrades fallen. Those who once stabbed Caesar, now paying with their own blood. Exhaustion flooded your body, but you had to keep moving, knowing stopping meant death. At last, when drums signaled the first day's end, you and the survivors retreated to camp. You washed your hands, wiped dried blood from your sword, trying to shake the guilt clinging to your mind. You saw Brutus standing alone under the moonlight, his figure lonely and powerless. You knew the battle wasn't over, that this was just the start of an inevitable collapse. And you, once a traitor, what were you fighting for? Freedom, honor, or simply survival? In the dark night, you lay by a river, listening to its quiet flow, telling yourself that whatever the outcome, you'd never forget these horrific days. Days when you had to wield a sword, face yourself, and a history written in blood and tears. You're forgotten, not instantly, not just by time or dry histories, but by louder voices, those who write history with bold ink and resounding tones. As Rome sang Caesar's praises, as Antony stood on platforms, as Octavian began a new era, your name faded to a faint shadow, a slip unmentioned in official records. You thought you'd be remembered, at least as one who dared stand, part of a tragic but heroic tale. But history spares no room for small figures like you. It names only the great, the game makers, and you're just an anonymous traitor, a non-entity in time's endless flow. They speak of Brutus, with mixed admiration and hatred. They talk of Cassius, the man of schemes and ambition. But you're buried under their shadows, like a thin veil light can't pierce. You become a story untold, a nameless traitor, living in the silence of oblivion. Former allies are now enemies. Those who knew you no longer recall who you were. You wander cities, no one asking, no glance lingering beyond a second. You weren't the only one to kill Caesar, but you're the only one unmentioned. You wonder if anyone in those crowds ever remembers you, if anyone told your story in history's light, or if you're forever a buried mystery. You read histories, scholars' lectures, poems praising Caesar and condemning traitors. You see no name, no image of yourself, only a blurred past. You try to hold on to some faith, that at least in personal memory, in dreams and pain, you still exist. But out there, the world doesn't wait for small figures, and history doesn't forgive shadows. You realize being forgotten isn't the worst. Worse is being remembered as a nameless traitor, a man without agency, a silent ghost erased from the main story. You live in nameless solitude, amid blank pages, silent walls of oblivion. Looking back on your journey, you don't know if you truly lived or were just an untold tale. Does history name traitors? Maybe, but your name isn't among them. You're the forgotten one, the traitor the world doesn't want to remember, a small dot in Rome's harsh annals, and that, perhaps, is your final punishment. Your story doesn't end just because your name is forgotten, or because you're a nameless traitor in the world's eyes. The truth is, your tale is a small piece in the vast, complex tapestry of Roman politics, where loyalty isn't a given but a relentless battle, where collapse never comes from one person but from a chain of unstoppable events. You once believed in an ideal, a free and just Rome, but you also know Rome was never peaceful. It's a savage beast, always hungry for power, ready to devour anyone who dares defy it. The conspiracy to betray Julius Caesar wasn't just a group of men stabbing a general in the back. It was a symbol of the deep conflict between personal loyalty and political duty, between power and justice, between the past and future of an empire on the brink of collapse. You, who stood in the conspiracy's shadows, now see clearer than anyone that Caesar's fall wasn't the end, but the start of a cycle of violence and power struggles lasting decades. Those who replaced him, from Mark Antony to Octavian, kept writing new chapters of Rome's tragedy, with bloody wars, betrayals, and unquenchable ambitions. You were once lost between loyalty and betrayal, between so-called honor and harsh reality. But now you see that no one can be wholly loyal in a world where power shifts, where survival depends on flexibility and adaptation. Roman politics is an endless chess game, where each move could be the last, where loyalty can be traded, and betrayal can become a weapon for survival. You're no longer just a traitor, but part of a complex system, a web of decisions, choices, mistakes, and sacrifices. And in that understanding, you find some peace. Because even if your story is forgotten, even if you're a ghost in history, you lived, fought, and shaped history. You weren't the only one to lose, but you weren't one who never won. And perhaps, in the chaos of politics and loyalty, Rome's history became a great lesson in resilience, resistance, and acceptance. You look to the distant horizon, where the sun begins to rise, casting first rays through dark clouds. It's not an end, but a new beginning, not for you, but for those who walk the path you once took. And you know, whatever happens, history will always name those who dared to choose, to live, to sacrifice, whether their names are carved on stone or just faint echoes in ancient pages. Philippi ended not as your dreams once painted, with no cheers of victory or tearful embraces. Instead, it was a bitter defeat, a deep wound, cutting into the fragile faith of those who stabbed Caesar. You stood there, watching familiar comrades fall, including Cassius and Brutus, once your guiding banners, now just ghosts adrift in smoke and blood. Cassius chose death before capture, and you remember his eyes calm yet despairing, as if he'd let go of all he had left. Brutus was different, standing on a small hill, gazing at the enemy, his eyes cold but filled with final resolve. You knew the choices were few, keep fleeing or die with Brutus to preserve the last shred of honor. You looked at your blood-stained hands, feeling each pulse remind you of the past. Part of you wanted to run, to vanish into the dark, where wounds and sins could no longer cling. But another part, deep within, feared the darkness of oblivion. You didn't know if you'd be remembered as a traitor, or one who tried to save what was right in a chaotic world. Brutus turned, his deep gaze reading your every thought. "We've reached the end of the road," he said softly, but the words rang like a death knell. "Now we can choose to go as free men, or keep living in shadows." Your heart tightened. The choice wasn't a straight path to freedom, but a tangled web of life and death, decisions that would haunt you forever. You looked around, seeing surviving soldiers gather weapons, some whispering of new lives, others preparing to flee, escaping history. You didn't know what to do. You once thought you could escape Caesar's shadow and the traitors, but now that shadow loomed larger, pulling you toward despair's abyss. Finally, Brutus drew you close, gave a troubled look, and said, "If I go, I want to go with those who believed in the ideal, not those who ran." His words were a challenge, an invitation, a conclusion. You stood there, facing the choice of your life: keep fleeing ghosts and judgment, or stay, face fate, and die with those you trusted. You knew no path was easy, no answer perfect, but you also knew, whatever you chose, your life would never be the same. You looked to the horizon, where the sun began to set, feeling the cold wind on your skin, and stepped forward with new resolve, whether to flee or die with Brutus. You wouldn't let the past and its ghosts rule you another day. Your story wasn't over, but you learned one thing: sometimes, the greatest choice isn't life or death, but holding on to who you are in the darkest hours. You survived, not a miracle, but a mix of luck and near-inhuman survival instinct. When Brutus took his life, when Cassius ended his with his sword, you turned from the battlefield of ash and blood. You left behind comrades, ideals, even the name tied to a historic conspiracy. But is survival worth it? That's the unanswered question you face each cold night, when the wind whistles through door cracks like whispers of restless souls. You became an exile, homeless, nameless, voiceless, no longer the one who held the dagger, just a fugitive in the dark, carrying the obsession of what you did and what you can't undo. Each day, you wonder if you deserve the life fate granted, when everyone you cared for has fallen, when Rome, the city you tried to save, has transformed under the power of those you opposed. You wander through strange lands, from coastal villages to remote mountain towns, seeking a place to call home, where the past won't haunt you. But you know no place is truly a haven. Fear and guilt are inseparable shadows, trailing you like your own reflection. You try to rebuild, taking menial jobs as weapons against the inner darkness, but you never escape the feeling of carrying death within. Some nights, you dream of Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, and yourself, those you lost, betrayed, abandoned. You wake gasping, heart empty, wondering if you're living or merely existing. You read histories, hear tales of heroes and traitors, wondering if you deserve mention or are just a forgotten nobody. In your weakest moments, you realize survival isn't the journey's end, but the start of another battle with yourself, regret, and wordless solitude. You know you did unforgivable things, but you can't turn back. You can't change the past, only live with it. Learn to forgive yourself, or bury yourself in oblivion. At life's crossroads, you wonder, is what's left worth what you lost? Or is it just a string of dim days, shrouded by the past's darkness, with no escape? The answer may never come, but you know you must keep going, because this is the only life you have. However cruel and harsh, you survived. But do you deserve it? That's the question no one can answer for you, the one you'll face for the rest of your days. The story of Julius Caesar's betrayal and its lasting consequences is a profound mirror for us today, especially in American society, where power, loyalty, and political transparency are always hot topics. In the story, figures like Brutus, Cassius, and even you, a dagger-wielding conspirator, faced tough choices between ideals and reality, personal loyalty and duty to the community. They believed betraying Caesar would save Rome, but the cost was deep division, war, and prolonged collapse. This is a clear lesson that when power is used opaquely and trust is broken, the consequences aren't just personal loss, but can fracture an entire society. In today's United States, where political division is stark, the story reminds us of the importance of honesty and transparency in leadership, and of maintaining public trust. When leaders and citizens can't engage openly, or when personal agendas trump the common good, society risks crisis and instability. Moreover, the story shows that survival doesn't equal true victory, as in your case, a survivor forgotten by history, carrying unending solitude. This underscores that, in modern life, success isn't just enduring hardship, but preserving integrity and moral values. The advice for us is to carefully weigh choices, stay loyal to truth and community, and avoid letting personal calculations undermine shared principles. And most importantly, remember that history, though it may forget some, always records those who act for the common good with integrity and responsibility. If you find the story of Julius Caesar and its historical lessons compelling, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next thrilling journey through history.